Good afternoon. Welcome to the Walker Arts Center. My name is Eric Crosby, Associate Curator of Visual Arts. Today's program, I think, will be a very memorable one as we mark the opening of our newest exhibition, Jack Whitten, 5 Decades of Painting. The exhibition was organized by the Museum of Contemporary Art San Diego and curated by Catherine Canjo, the Deputy Director of Art and Programs there. It's the first career-long survey of Whitten's work, and while it is long overdue, it could not come at a more perfect time, I think, as Jack's work, for those of you who have visited the exhibition know well, is nothing short of breathless in its ambition and scope today. This important exhibition at MCA San Diego was made possible by generous lead underwriting support from Dr. Paul Jacobs. Additional funding was provided by the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the LLWW Foundation. Major support for the Walker Art Center's presentation has been provided by Elizabeth Redleaf, and we're also very grateful to our sponsor, RBC Wealth Management, which also sponsored MCA San Diego's presentation. Finally, this lecture, which Misa Jeffries in the Visual Arts Department has expertly organized, is made possible by generous support from Anne and Carol Mack. Here to converse with Jack, in addition to all of you, is the renowned art historian Richard Shiff, who we are very delighted to have here in Minneapolis. The conversation will no doubt explore the various bodies of work on view in the exhibition, from the rarely seen to the iconic, as well as Jack's distinct and, to borrow his word, evolving philosophy of making. Here is an artist who, for 50 years, has reinvented the medium of painting, time and again, finding not only himself, his identity as he contains in acrylic paint, but also a common language of empathy and history, sensibility and plasticity, sound and vision. The exhibition is the single largest museum presentation of Jack's work to date, featuring some 60 canvases and a dozen key works on paper. But really, in truth, it can only offer a snapshot of what this man has accomplished in art as in life. Born in Bessemer, Alabama in 1939, Jack was a child of the segregated South, an ROTC cadet, a pre-med student at the Tuskegee Institute, an organizer in the civil rights movement down in Baton Rouge, an art student at Cooper Union in New York, and ultimately an ambitious young painter in Manhattan, intersecting with the likes of, you have to just brace yourself for this list, Willem de Kooning, Barnett Newman, Norman Lewis, Romare Bearden, and so many others, as he developed his own language of abstraction and painterly process. Since those formative moments in the 1960s, Jack has mounted many solo exhibitions, notably among them at the Whitney Museum of American Art in 1974, at the Studio Museum in Harlem in 1983, as well as group exhibitions around the world. And although he modestly maintains, hey man, it's just acrylic paint, you have to look closely at these surfaces, their structures, their textures and icons, and Jack's spiraling world of ideas comes into focus. The philosophy of jazz, politics and poetics, notions of photography and memory, mourning and hope, quantum physics and fractal geometry, tools of mapping and scanning and the technologies of our information age, dare I even say time travel every once in a while. I am not an illustrator of ideas, Jack has said. I am the idea. Dr. Richard Shiff is a renowned scholar and professor at the University of Texas at Austin, serving as the Effie Marie Cain Regents Chair in Art, as well as the director of the Center for the Study of Modernism there. A graduate of Harvard College and later Yale University, he previously taught at Emory University, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, among many other institutions. We would be here all day if I listed his many publications in full, so let me just give you a sampling of some of the titles, which really span the range of modern and contemporary subjects. Cézanne and the End of Impressionism, 1984. Critical Terms for Art History, 1996 and 2003. Barnett Newman, A Catalogue Raisonné, 2004. Doubt, 2008. An entry in a series of volumes titled Theories of Modernism and Postmodernism in the Visual Arts. Between Sense and de Kooning, 2011, and most recently in 2014, Ellsworth Kelly, The New York Drawings, 1954 to 1962. I've really long admired Richard's line of questioning, as he's dared to broach in really the risky context of art, such nebulous and vital human subjects as sense, doubt, feeling, and today, soul, in ways that I think are very insightful. Terms that are so often important to artists like Jack, but so often elude the academic. Jack and Richard will dialogue for about an hour, and at that point, open up the exchange to all of you for questions. I know you'll have many. Microphones will travel up and down the aisles, so I ask you to please wait until you get the microphone to ask your question clearly so that our audiences online can hear and so that our speakers can also hear. So thank you, and please help me welcome Mr. Jack Whitten and Dr. Richard Shiff.
Those of you who have seen the exhibition know how impressive it is, really spectacular, and how beautiful the installation is. And those of you who may not have seen it yet, see it immediately. I have a text today, and I've written my introductory remarks into a short text that comes to an end. Because if I speak without any text, or even from a set of notes, I know from my experience that I'll talk at too great a length. If you start talking about Jack Whitten's paintings, you don't stop. Barnett Newman, who was a nonstop talker about anything, which Jack probably encountered, said that he especially liked to talk about painting. Good painting, Newman said, was something you really couldn't talk about. So you just kept going, if only out of the embarrassment that you weren't getting anywhere. I'm nevertheless going to speak as if I were Jack Whitten's ideal viewer. He makes it easy. Here's what Jack told Alex Gray in an interview 2 years ago. I like the idea that the viewer might be frozen by wonder, trying to understand what they're looking at, or how the painting was made, or even what materials I'm using. So, primarily, I'm here today to wonder. Some of what I'm going to say will seem like an explanation of what Jack may be doing, but I'm just wondering in public, and it's all speculative. Jack's reference to wonder came up in the context of remarks about the painting now on the screen, Warped Circle. It's from 2013. You can see that there's a kind of wave that runs across the surface of acrylic paint, made by the application of a squeegee or scraping device, or what Jack sometimes calls the developer. There's a lot of paint laid down, a lot of different colors, and then, while still wet, it's given a drag and pull with a little shimmy and twist built into the motion. You end up with something like a broken wave. The paint doesn't represent a wave. The paint is the wave, and the wave is the paint. But inserted into this wave, interfering with its surface tension, is an irregular loop, also acrylic paint. Jack describes how the loop, which was once a circle, came to be this way, quote, "At the last minute, I allowed the acrylic strip to warp. This was a paradox of being caught between that which is static and that which is moving." When Jack refers to what is static, I assume that he means the material, the acrylic strip, dried and hardened into a particular form. But the strip retains its flexibility and elasticity as if it had potential for movement locked within it. Gravity releases the potential. So Jack needs only to let the strip fall and chance will warp it. The static thing begins to move. Jack then has an unforeseen form. Part of it really belongs to him, to his process. After all, he made the circular strip. But the warp belongs to gravity and is the result of a universal process. This universal quality or force or feeling is what Jack might, at least sometimes, call soul. Why can a circle become a warped loop and become almost any other form as well? Because it exists in multiple dimensions, or we might say, because it has soul. These are terms that Jack has been using recently to help him think, after the fact, about what his process of art has shown him. He talks about multiple dimensions, and he talks about soul. So, as you may already know, or will soon see, in a kind of frenzy of activity last spring, Jack produced a major work for this Walker exhibition, a painting he titled Soul Map. If it really is a map, then it ought to be a guide or perhaps a picture telling us about soul. Normally, a map is a reduction of what it represents. If a mountainous area has peaks and valleys, it can still be mapped on a flat surface. But if soul is multidimensional, if it's like thinking and feeling and matter and force and spirit all in one, then how many dimensions should its map have? This is what I'm going to wonder about. Let's look at something more familiar, a photograph. It's an early one, a paper print from the 19th century with a characteristically grainy look. With this type of photography, the image develops within a layer of light-sensitive emulsion. The image seems to arise from within the surface of the paper. A photograph is extremely flat, but it projects a dimensional image. It's a two-dimensional map of a three-dimensional view. Jack's paintings often give the impression of an image arising up from underneath, in the way that the image of a developing photographic print rises from under. I won't attempt to say much about the various technical procedures that Jack has used, but it's significant that the crucial features of each work are the results of a process. The image has to be, so to speak, developed out of the materials. It isn't planned in advance. There are no sketches for Jack's visual thoughts. In 1964, he became involved with a strange notion. Here's how he stated it at the time. The image is photographic, therefore I must photograph my thoughts. Jack may have intuited that in order to get close to his own thinking, he would need a process that couldn't be disturbed, not even by his own thinking. The image of his thought would need to be developed in the automatic way that a photograph develops up from a formless layer of light-sensitive emulsion. So first, here's a work of 1964. Obviously very photographic in feel, but all paint, a layer of paint pressed through, from underneath, through a layer of thin fabric that's placed on top of it. And the image simply appears. Now a work of 1974. Think of the kind of blur you sometimes see in color photography. This blur is the result, in this case, in the case of the painting, of acrylic layers being released from underneath by what is essentially a process of scraping. Now a work of 1977-78, and notice how the rectangle seems to emerge from underneath the raster of horizontal lines. It's like a thought emerging from the drone of brainwaves. And of course, it resembles all kinds of scanned imagery and digital imagery. But what we see are forms that seem to emerge from in back of or within the screen of the raster. And here a related work from 1979 where the chromatic colors seem to emerge from below the raster, from the grid. Yet this color may have been applied from above. It's difficult to tell where it really is. I want to add the moving images of television as a reference that often seems as relevant as still photography. This is a work of 1970 compared with the look of a cathode ray TV screen with interference. In the painting, the horizontal raster lines appear superimposed on the image, but are actually revealing the image in this textured, multi-dimensional surface. It's if you were to touch it, you'd feel the peaks and the valleys. It's a very physical thing. Now let's return to Soul Map, the painting completed just this year. Physically, it consists of two canvas panels. The break is between the lighter side and the darker side, but the lighter side has an optical break between lighter and much lighter. So I'm just referring to the break here, which is not a physical break in the canvas, but it's an optical break. And then here, there's a physical break. The sense of light or an image somehow being brought up from underneath, the way photography makes an image look, seems much closer to what happens in the left panel than in the right panel. This is because the right panel is in much higher relief than the left panel, and much of it consists of Jack's tesserae, his little tiles of hardened acrylic that he often uses as building blocks for an image. They're like cast acrylic objects. These elements are collaged into the surface at slightly different angles to the underlying plane, so they reflect light in slightly different directions. Instead of an effect of a filmy screen with an image emerging, you have the effect of innumerable light beams, little searchlights projecting into the space you inhabit. The light is enhanced by metallic granules in the acrylic. So even by the most conventional reckoning, the right panel is multi-dimensional. This difference between left and right isn't absolute. The right end of the left panel seems to have more dimensionality than the left end. So here is the left end, the lightest part, seen by itself. And you notice those dark spots, which are little circles of hard acrylic slightly raised up off the surface, as if they were marking the raster of a screen or some kind of reckoning device, a mapping device. And here's where the transition occurs between the lighter and the darker, and then there is the darker by itself. And in that area, it appears that when Jack scraped or pulled, he had more material under the surface than in the lighter part, and it appears as traces that are being picked up by the scraping, like the rubbing of a tombstone or something of that nature. And then here is where the two panels abut, and you see a dramatic difference. The little button-like circles are relatively flat collage elements in the left panel, but they become volumetric in the right panel. That's hard to see, and I'm not sure I will even find them, but one I think is right there. And they're raised up higher than the equivalent over there. So an increase in dimension in a certain way. And that difference causes the left-hand buttons, I'll call them, to look like the image of the right-hand buttons reduced by one dimension. They're the shadow image of their more dimensional variant. In a way, every feature to the left is shadowy by comparison with every feature to the right. And this is why the left panel seems more photographic, filmier, screen-like. It's because the right panel is so physical and outward-looking. Soul Map shows a shadow world and a real world in the same picture. Here's the right panel by itself, and now, again, the entire painting. So what can I say? What can I wonder about? If Soul Map is indeed a map, a pictorial guide, it's a picture of the luminous chromatic dimensions of light. Jack writes that the fourth dimension, the one beyond what we normally see and touch, is, quote, the gateway to the visualization of multi-dimensions. He seems to be thinking of more than 4 dimensions. In fact, there's no numerical limit implied. The soul map will keep evoking new dimensions, added dimensions. In this sense, it can be a map of what we call soul, because soul exists beyond space and time, somewhere beyond 4 dimensions. Jack speaks of soul as if it were a quality or substance that we all share. Soul is collective feeling. It integrates individual feeling with the feeling of all other bodies within an encompassing physical environment. Jack works with light. His paintings project light. Each of the acrylic tesserae of his recent paintings projects light in a unique way. The physicists say that light appears under 2 aspects. It consists of particles or points, while it also consists of waves. We observe light at any given moment, either in one guise or the other. The quantum theory, to which Jack often refers, provides a way of integrating the 2 incompatible features of light. Jack speaks of finding the dimensions of light through the materials, through acrylic paint. Think of the wave aspect of light. Jack associates this with the left-hand part of the soul map because he dragged the paint across the surface and through whatever interference generated the irregularities in the mark. Now think of the particle or point aspect of light. To do this, imagine a wave that passes across a surface or through a substance. It's going like this, right? That's how we picture the wave or graph it, map it. Now turn yourself 90 degrees so you can see the wave head on. It's going to become just a line, straight line. Now turn another 90 degrees, and you can see the line from the end. So it's a point of projection. So it's already 4 dimensions. We've already got 4 dimensions. The movement of the wave in space introduces time, and you can't represent it without moving. And the 3 positions are the 3 spatial dimensions. What we have on the right side of the soul map are the lines and points because the elements there all project forward from the ground plane outward. The left panel is the wave across, the right panel, the point. Together, it's multidimensional light, even in its blackness. Just a couple of weeks ago, Jack wrote this: "Jazz led me to the concept of soul mapping. Jazz is much more than a narrative account of soul. The soul has many elements and is available to anyone who is capable of feeling." So here's a guess at an interpretation. The many musical elements of jazz are like the waves, the lines, and the points. They create parallel lines of musical narrative that sustain unpredictable patterns of sound. Jack creates the analogous effect in layers of light and color. The question remains, how does Jack Whitten get so many dimensions, so much soul, into one surface? It isn't photography, or film, or television, or digital electronics, or virtual reality. As Jack kept reminding me when I visited his studio, it's just acrylic paint. So, Jack, I'm still wondering, how do you do it?
I wonder myself a lot of times.
I bet you do.
Yeah. The person that got me, the person that got me trapped in all of this was John Coltrane. John Coltrane, the year had to be my brother Tommy was still alive, had to be 1967. John got tired of my pestering him with questions. What about this and what about that? And then one night he just looked at me and he had his hands up. He says, "Don't you get it? It's just a wave. It's like a wave, man. It's like a wave." That's what the man told me.
You're still working on it.
I'm still working on it, but that had to be 1967. It's just like a wave. I can't say I understood what he was talking about, but I took it and ran with it. And I produced the second show at Allen Stone Gallery, my second one-man show at a commercial gallery. And the paintings were titled Light Sheets. People who wrote about Coltrane's music used the terminology sheets of sound. Mm-hmm. Those were not John's word. He didn't say that. But I do remember his saying to me, wave. I did those paintings for the second show. I had a fellow down the street from me on Lisbernard Street. His name was John Materda. He was a sail maker, and he did coverings for trucks at a canvas shop. I went to John and told him what I wanted to do, what I was planning. He says, "Yeah, I can do something for you." I wanted something where I didn't have to stretch the canvas. So John took a number 10 cotton duck canvas, folded the edges, and he had some really heavy-duty machines, and he sewed the edges on the outside. This allowed me to tack the canvases directly to the wall. My thinking then was plano light, where the plane, as we speak of it in painting, is actually a plane of light. And I developed very complex systems of building large frames. They were so large, they were like silkscreen. Any of you have done silk screening? They were like silkscreen frames, but they were so large I had to attach them with pulleys to the ceiling with ropes that I could lower them down to the painting, and the acrylic paint was squeezed through. But I was dealing with light purely as a plane. It was successful. Interesting group of paintings I got out of that. Those paintings started this whole thing about light being more physical. Before that, my thinking in painting was light more so from a basic naturalistic dimension, sunlight and so forth. Hans Hofmann helped because Hans Hofmann said, this thing about painters dealing with sunlight or incandescent light, Hans Hofmann said, that's not your light. He said, that's sun, that's nature's light. Or that's man-made light. Hans Hofmann said that the only light you got is in that damn tube. We like to become romantic and theatrical with our ideas and imaginary things, but Hans had a way of bringing it right down to a physical fact. Only light you got is in that tube of paint. Of course he's right. The planar light took me a long ways, up through the 1970s. I have to give you a little background on this. That's why I'm going this route. 1970, I'm dropping the gesture. I was very much involved with Bill de Kooning. The truth about it, I followed Bill de Kooning around like a little puppy. I mean, every time I saw him, I made my presence known. He also got tired of looking at me. But you know, as a young painter, you're looking, you're out there, you're searching, you're desperate. And I became very much under the wing of Bill de Kooning. I would run uptown in Harlem on 125th Street, hang out with Norman Lewis. Norman Lewis was also another master of gesture. Norman Lewis got in my head. Fuck with it. After the 1960s, I got tired of gesture. I realized that there was something else that I needed. I didn't know at the time, but I was making a mistake between the notion of sign and symbol. They're two different things, but I didn't know that. The gesture is basically a sign. It is a sign. And all the sign does is designate something. It points you somewhere. What I really wanted was a symbol, but I had no way of dealing with it. I didn't have enough knowledge, not that I have the tools to do it. So I came up with what I call slab paintings, a slab. All I wanted to do was to get rid of all of the gesture that I had experienced throughout the 60s, trying to get Bill de Kooning out of my head, trying to find a way to get out of Bill de Kooning. That's why I made the developer. A big change occurred. I realized that my approach to painting, coming out of first stage modernism, second stage modernism, another mistake I was making, I was trying to paint the painting. That wasn't good enough. I had to change the verb to paint as a verb. I had to change the verb to paint to the verb to make. So the way to do this was not to try to paint the painting, but to make the painting. So at that point, I developed these slabs. Now the slab was a reaction to the notion of touch, which is basically European painting. The French were masters at it. An older buddy of mine His name was Bill Haywood Rivers. Good painter. Had spent a lot of time in France. Had a deep love for the French painters, Matisse especially, which was all about touch. I wanted to get away from touch. See, when you're desperate for something, you're always trying to get away from something. You're trying to get rid of it. In other words, you know, you might be fighting with the father figure, your father. You got to kill the father to get somewhere. So I had to kill a lot of people. Now, I'm being straight. Is that okay? The audience doesn't mind?
I'm following you.
Audience doesn't mind. He had to kill a lot of people. Had to get rid of Bill Rivers. He was also messing with my head. The slabs were anti-touch. The touch is dependent upon the hand. Remove the hand, you can remove the touch. Let the tool do it. Make the damn thing. Don't try to paint it no more.
In a single gesture.
And
right?
in a single gesture. Preferable, because, you know, I don't have no damn money and you're working a lot, paying the landlord and shit. Trying to keep your head above water. You know, time becomes desperate. If I could get it to occur in one single stroke, more the better. Besides, when you're messing around with that much paint, where you're looking for a film of paint that might measure 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 inches, it's costing money. You ain't got no money. A little bit of money I did have, you know, go out and buy a little grass. Got to pay some paint bills. Got to have a little wine. So my figure, besides the speed factor, which was kind of a leftover from abstract expressionism, the faster I can do it, the better. So I learned to lay down that slab of paint. At the same time, it got me around the notion of relational painting. All painting up to that point of the slabs were relational, all of it. Meaning that it was painted by brush, by hand, and every time the painter's hand lifts and moves, points are developed. All of that's relational thinking. What the slab did was to erase the notion of the relational. I'm off in non-relational territory then. This is the beginning of the multidimensional thinking in painting. That's the background for it. That's what started it. Now, as I started growing and started finding out more and reaching out for things, for inspiration, things for spurring my imagination, the artist needs something to spur the imagination. We don't care where it comes from, as long as it stirs the imagination. I turned my focus over to the scientists, especially those people who work with particle physicists, because they were explaining more of what I was feeling than anybody. There was nobody else. There was nothing else I could turn to. Throughout the late 60s and the early 70s, photography used as an analogy helped. Hence, the image is photographic, therefore I must photograph my thoughts, which still guides me. But that caused a lot of problems. I don't mind expressing a little bit of them. I went around for years thinking I was a camera. You know what that can do to your head?
Well, there are some younger artists today who have the same illusion.
Well, God bless them.
It comes back again.
When you start walking down the street, you look around, you go click, click, click. Hey, man, you better stop and take it easy, you know, because there's an edge out there. Like in art, we know that a little bit of anxiety is good. A little bit of anxiety fuels the the fire. But too much anxiety, no, I've been there. I've been right there. You get me?
On the edge.
Yep, and I've been there. I don't like it down there. Don't like it. 75, I like being right there. I don't mind admitting that.
What I'd like, what I'd like you to do, the things that I didn't do in my introduction, say a little bit more about how the slab paintings, the tool that you use, and I mean, I think everything is described very well in the catalog, but not everybody has read it, and maybe how you developed the tesserae, which you only started to use at a certain point, and all kinds of analogies come to mind, looking at those paintings in terms of digitization and all kinds of things, and very often you seem to be ahead of this curve of the actual consumer technology that you're, well, of course you were interested in mosaics, so that's part of it.
Yeah, the tesserae was inevitable that I would go to that point, because I knew from the scientific community that the shit could happen either as a wave or as a point. And the only way to get to the point was through the tesserae.
It's like focusing the light.
Exactly. But first I had to develop that slab in order to get to the tesserae, right? Another great thinker that helped a lot was the Swedish guy Barnett Newman. He was a Swedish mathematician. His first edition of the Fractal Geometry of Nature came out, early 70s. I got it. And immediately I realized what Mr. Mandelbrot was talking about was something that I had been looking for. When he pointed out that there is a geometry in nature, then one of those revelations goes off. Like bingo, all of that muck, nasty, evasive shit we were talking about in surrealism and automism had a geometry to it. When I realized it had a geometry to it, it took some of the pressure off of my head. You understand? The psychology, if we're not careful, the psychological factor can be overwhelming. Can't deal with it. Can't nobody deal with it. But discovering that there was a geometry to it, it allowed me to develop more of a structural method of dealing with it. Now, I'm an old carpenter. I'm a cabinet maker. I make my living as a cabinet maker, carpenter. I know how to build things. I know about structure. I know about weights. I know about shear weights. I know about how much it takes to support so much weight as a beam. I know about lintel, post-lintel systems. I know about that. When I was found out that it was a geometry to it, it allowed me to use a lot of my carpenter skills and in building a cabinet to build a painting. It was the geometry.
So when, I'm thinking of what your studio looks like. And in your studio, you've got available to use all of these pieces of cast acrylic or sometimes shreds of acrylic, all different kinds of forms.
That's correct.
Some of them very regular, like little bricks.
Yeah.
Some of them very irregular, like sheets of thin scraps of acrylic. And listening to you right now, it occurs to me that the availability of all of these elements that that you can pick up in your hand very easily and manipulate allows you to create a grand composition or grand structure.
Yeah.
I mean, it gives you a grasp of things, a way of getting into something that's so much bigger than you are.
Again, that's correct. But remember, it's still geometry. Those shreds, those bits you speak of, I could use it either as fractal, and I can penetrate dimensions through the fractal that I cannot penetrate through the planal. A lot of that stuff is purely Euclidean. I can deal with it as planal geometry. But there are other areas I have to go through in dimensions that I can't do it with the planal. I have to go over to the fractal. Now I'm into an area because of that damn painting there, the soul map, has pushed me into an area where I need another geometry because the shit's getting complicated now. Hence I use the word quantum geometry. There's another geometry out there. It's a lot of different forms of geometry, by the way. A lot of different, more than the average person thinks. The scientists know about them because they use them. They use them to construct their theories and so forth, right? But there's a lot of different forms of geometry.
You referred to molecular perception.
Yes, a concept that I developed in the early 70s. I realized that we live in a world today where modern technology, whether we are aware of it or not, has already changed our perception of the world. Think about it. Whether you're aware of it or not, science and technology has changed our perception. We see things through it. We don't see the world the way the Renaissance people saw it. No. It's changed. In truth, it has changed it to such a degree we haven't even caught up with it yet.
How do we catch up with your paintings? For example, I mean, let's see if I can find one that mystifies me. That. How did you make that?
Oh, that's DNA.
That's DNA, yeah. Mm-hmm. DNA too, yeah.
Okay, I'm using these terms because they're available to me through our present contemporary society. I have the belief that art should reflect the times that it's done in. Why should I go out and paint a guy? Oh, I'm sorry. Why should I go out and paint a 14th century landscape?
How did you make that?
Through soul.
All right.
Now, look. Soul is an ancient concept. Ancient people knew about soul. Throughout the history, ancient people have always acquainted soul synonymous with spirit, synonymous with mind. Mind, soul, spirit, it's all the same thing. All the same thing.
So soul is according to some theories, it's the source of motion. It's what moves us, what makes us animate beings.
Yeah.
And animates everything, the world.
Right. And in saying that, in the black community, part of our survival, we said we own soul. And that allowed us to get through some heavy duty, oppressive stuff, right? So when my man said to me, I didn't have no money to buy a saxophone. Didn't have no money. white man took my drums from me. Didn't have no money to buy a horn. I had that. I had the body. I had this whole anthropological thing, right? So the continuation of the soul was available out of necessity, out of political necessity.
So that's where the politics gets into your...
Politics getting into it, right? You can't avoid politics.
Yeah.
Nobody, forget about it. Any of you out there, black or white, thinks you can avoid politics, you're kidding yourself. Not possible. I had an experience once. Down where I live in Greece on the island of Crete, we have Mount Cézanne, Mount Ida. That's where Zeus was born, by the way. And I wanted to go up there. I hired a guy to take me to the top of the mountain. Probably one of the most physically difficult things I've ever done in my life. I'm too old to do that shit now, but I did it when I was in my 20s. When I got up there, approaching to the top, it was late that evening. You saw colors like you never saw before in my life. You could see the whole coastline of Crete. It was moving. If there is any such thing as a sublime in this world, I experienced it on top of Mount Cézanne. It was so moving. The guide, I remember forget him, he held his hands up and he said in Greek, Oreo, Oreo, toso Oreo, toso Oreo, kidak. And in a split second, his mind changed. He says, Jack, I got one over there. I'm saying, what are you talking about? He pointed to a spot. This man was one of the mountain rebels fighting the Germans. I got one over there. Boy, I had a big revelation. Okay. We're talking about nature and the beauty of nature, okay? I mean, totally sublime. And without missing a beat, he says to me, I got one over there. He says, look at this. Look at that. It's beautiful. But I'll kill for it. Understand what's going on? Here we have aesthetics in its most fantastic meaning coming out of nature, which it first did. It came out of nature. That's where it came from. That was the first one. Without missing a beat, he says, I'll kill for it. What I'm witnessing is a transformation of the aesthetic immediately into the political. We all do it. We all do it in one way or another. All of us. The airplane was coming down here, coming over Minnesota. And I sort of jokingly said to my daughter, as I looked out of the airplane, I said, you know, it used to be a lot of Indians out there. Yeah, but we know the story. We know the history. Of course it was beautiful. Lakes filled with fish. The whole city here is built on the lumber trade. Is that correct? Timber. Millions and millions of acres of timber was cut. You're talking big bucks. Big bucks. Fresh water, rivers, lakes, beautiful. But somebody was there. Oh, you come over and it says, look, oh boy, that's good. You agree that's good? That's beautiful, Richard. That's some damn good fish out there. It's so good. So I say to you, we got to protect this. This is the political. All people all over the world do the same thing. It's just a matter of who's into the position to do it. The same thing. So the political, Steve said, the political, in my case, in painting, when I realized this, that the political bit could be put into the paint as matter. When I realized that, I saw that as far as the narrative is concerned, could be built into the paint itself. That's why I take deep pleasure in saying when I talk about the paintings, I know the shit gets complicated, it sounds a little intellectual at times, but I take pride in saying, hey man, it's paint on canvas.
Do you want to say something about the 9/11 painting in this context?
Oh, one of the most powerful, painful things I ever witnessed. I owned a little building down in Tribeca. I had just come back from Greece. It was a beautiful day. Bright, sunny skies, blue. And the fire engines came down on the block. And always, living down in Tribeca, I was one of the first artists in Tribeca. I moved there in '62. By the way, my rent was $85 a month. So whenever the fire trucks came in the neighborhood, I always came down to see what was happening. This particular morning, the fire trucks was lining up. Someone had reported a gas leak, and the fire department came. There was a young Frenchman who was doing a documentary on the fire department. His camera was down looking into the manhole cover. I was talking to the fire captain. When a sound came over our head, last night I had to leave the gala benefit because the sound bothers me. I suffer from tinnitus. The sound was so loud, unfortunately. The sound was so powerful that I could feel the flesh on my body rippling. We looked up and that airplane was right above our heads, right on top of us. It came across us. The young Frenchman with his camera lifted it up, his camera, just in time to see that plane hit the North Tower. It was an awesome sight. On the video, when you hear the voice, holy shit, that's me. I was arguing with the fire captain. I says, wow, man, wow. Yeah, the fire captain said, what a horrible accident. And out of pure gut feeling, I said to the captain, man, that was no fucking accident. That was no accident. And he really became arrogant with me. He said, what do you mean? You saw what I saw. It's an accident. Even my tenant downstairs, I had a little pizza shop downstairs on the corner, he was arguing. It's an accident. What makes you think that somebody would do something like that? Of course, the firemen, their trucks, they made a beeline straight down Chambers Street to the World Trade Center. While we were arguing, I'm arguing with my tenant and some more people on the street, the second plane comes around and hit. And then I poked him in his chest. I told him, I said, you still think it's a fucking accident? You think that's an accident? By that point, people are screaming on the street, people are crying. The first thing you saw, no smoke, no flame. For a few split seconds, all you saw was a chandelier of broken glass. I hate to admit it, but for a few seconds, it was total sublime. The whole sky was a chandelier of glass with the light reflecting in all kinds of different directions. Immediately after that, with the gaping hole, you could see the tail of the plane still stuck into the building, came the flames and the smoke. I don't mind telling the story, but the painful part is having to watch those people jump out of the windows. And I've often said to myself, if that had been me there, what would I have done? I think I would have jumped. Again, I'm going back to my gut feelings. Okay, that much damage. Those fuckers are going to fall. I'm trying to calculate how are they going to fall. They're going to fall that way, that way. I'm thinking about my family, what I'm going to do, which way to run. Fuckers fell this way, imploded. Now, I'm one of the few people who can say that they saw the first bulldozers that came down to build the foundation for the towers. And I saw it go up step by step by step. And I saw it come down step by step by step. I had to live with the fact that close to 3,000 people were murdered for whatever reason you want to say. I had to live with it. I witnessed it. Close to 3,000 people murdered, not in some neighborhood in Baghdad or Vietnam, it's the fucking Tribeca.
How does the what does the painting mean to you? I mean, you made a very grand painting as a memorial.
I think it's a historical painting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the material qualities of it are rather amazing. I mean, from parts of it that fit together very well, other parts that seem to be like rubble. A ground area that has mysterious color, and the whole thing has, even in the context of the rest of your work, it has a kind of unique presence, that painting.
Well, it shows you what the power of emotion will do. You know, that there are different types of evil I'm finding out in the world. There are different categories of violence I'm finding out. I tend to divide it up in what I call violence as being generalities of violence, as opposed to particularities of violence. What I mean by that, it's one thing when you read in your newspapers, you watch TV, 60 people bombed in Iraq, killed in a second by a terrorist bomb. Another 50 killed over in Syria, another 50 down in Egypt. 30 people blown away in England, whatever, you know. But I'm at home, watching my TV, seeing that stuff. But when it becomes compressed, it's like what happened to me that time back in '64 when those kids were killed in that bombing down in the church in Birmingham, okay? That was particular. That was my neighborhood. So that distance creates something, how your emotions react. So the emotions comes in and plays a role here, and that's where I got that picture from. You know, that's a gut painting. And I built it that way. I wanted it visceral. I wanted the average person off the street to react to that painting and stand there and feel the sheer visceral response to it. It works.
It works.
It works.
It works.
Yeah. And I had to use a lot of different elements, again, dimensionals, to get the emotions to operate to that degree. There's a lot of blood in that painting. It's over a gallon of blood in that painting. I had been experimenting with blood suspended in acrylic, and I knew that it would hold up. It's pure oxide, why not? So it holds up very well.
Let me ask you about one other type of painting, and then we ought to have some audience response. But you have a number of, they're definitely thematic paintings, as the 9/11 painting is. A number of paintings that are dedicated to jazz musicians, like the Milt Jackson painting, the Thelonious Monk painting. Is the emotional sense of those paintings different? Or
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm dealing with specific personalities. I'm also dealing with specific experiences. For example, the Milt Jackson painting, I knew Milt. I went to his funeral. His wife had laid him out in this dark, dark mahogany casket. The insides were this real peachy satin. And I looked down on him. His skin had turned to like ebony. It's like this ebony. And she had prepared his hands like that, holdings. I had never seen him play with colored mallets before, but he was holding his mallets. They were brightly colored. And I remember looking down and I said, damn, that's my painting.
That's, yeah, the tesserae are very bright against the white. Yeah.
That's where the painting came
Yeah.
from, though.
Yeah.
That's where the painting came from. And of course, it has a high optical content. What I'm telling you, I'm trying to give you an example of how the artist penetrates symbol. I have gone far beyond the notion of sign. I'm off into symbol now. The sign pointed me there, but when I got there, it became symbol.
Yeah. The symbol is the meaning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or the soul within the
Down in
sign.
there. Yep,
Yeah.
you got it.
All right. Should we take some comments, questions, whatever? A microphone will come, and I think Eric is going to call on people, but there's one person right here.
So, Jack, thank you so much for that wonderful talk. I have a question particularly regarding your transition from your disavowal of the gesture, or the hand, as you say, and your move to the developer. And this move, this disavowal of the sign in terms of the symbol, but how does this relate to sort of the idea of the performative aspect of the gesture and of the rake, and sort of, if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I was aware of that from the beginning.
And the indeterminacy that brings along
Yeah.
as well.
You know, right toward the end of abstract expressionism, which is built upon gesture, different degrees of gesture, depending on who you're talking about, different between those in terms of color field, those who in terms of gesture. A lot of us realize that a large element of abstract expressionism, primarily because of gesture, was performance. Now, a lot of people took that to mean that if it's about performance, why paint anymore? The birth of performance came there, right at that moment in history. That's where it came from. But those of us, young painter like myself, I'm still interested in painting. I'm no damn performer. I mean, I accept the performance built into the act of gesture, but I had no need to separate the act of performance as a discipline within itself. That's how performance was born, right at that juncture of history. That's where it came from. I, as a young painter, I'm still interested in painting. I continued to pursue painting. A lot of people got frustrated behind abstract expressionism. They couldn't see nothing to do with it. Shit was too hard. Got to be too complicated, too much investment. I've heard things like, oh, I can't bear that degree of emotion. All that's true. So people separated, but in separating it, our new medium was born. That's why we have performance art today. But I was aware of that. The developer, I must state very clearly, beyond its intellectual concept attached to it, I did it out of necessity. I had to get around Bill de Kooning. I had been to Bill de Kooning's studio. I had seen his brushes. He had house paintings about that big, right? Biggest one I think I've ever seen was about like that. So I'm thinking, if he's got one about that size, shit, I'm going to build one 12 feet. Came out of necessity. You know, when you're young and you're ambitious, again, you got to kill the masters. You got to kill them. Do them in. Don't fuck around. It worked. It worked.
Yeah, incredible show and fascinating. So many questions to ask about different periods of that you've created. But I want to bring it right up to now. And Richard, you talked at length about the soul map, and this idea of soul, and wanting to explore what that is. And you talked about the need for a new geometry, and kind of left it there. Could you go into that?
Yeah, I'll do my best. This is even new for me. I realize that there's another geometry out there, and I don't know enough about it, but I do know that it exists over in the quantum realm. That I know, and that's the nature of my research now in the studio. I'm trying to break it down. Into elements that allows me to construct it. In saying that, when I realized how complex some of the concepts are that I work with, I went over to what the scientists call parallel thinking. Parallel thinking allows us to break it down. And we learn to delegate. We learn to delegate mind. I use 3 distinct processes: construct, deconstruct, reconstruct. Somewhere within those 3 processes is located the quantum realm. It's not totally cognitive at this point, but time I get back into the studio, this is where I start. This is where I start. The difficult is this. We as people, we can only visualize 3 dimensions. I don't know of anybody who can visualize 4. We try to say things like it has to do with time, which we know that time plays a factor in it. But in terms of pure visualization, I do think, I have to give myself a little credit here. I do think I have a slight handle on it, though. Richard explained something about the wave. If I turn 180 degrees, and I go this way, okay, I'm getting another dimension. In truth, this is why I leave that edge on the painting. If you notice in these paintings,
Yeah.
you're only aware of the skin of the paint. Now in the 70s, I was wrapping around that skin. But I stopped doing that. And it's very important that that edge exists for what it is. You turn around another 180 degrees, okay? But in his saying that, he brings up another whole set of difficulties. The scientists call it symmetries. Whoa. And the symmetries break down in specific groups. It's about 4 or 5 of those groups. Shit gets complicated. One thing that keeps me on track, though, I keep telling myself, going back to my kind of an understanding of Zen philosophical intentions. Hey, I keep a photograph, a reproduction of what's that guy's name? He did the song. Somebody, Louis Jordan. You know Louis Jordan? Somebody done change that lock on my door. You know that guy? I keep a photograph of him in his studio where he's going like this, you know? So when my head starts messing with me and it gets so hard, I've been to the point of like anxiety levels where I'm on the floor and I'm dying laughing. I look up at that photograph of Louis Jordan and it says, hey man, it can't be that hard. Sort of release sort of a thing, right? I'm close. I can feel it. I'm beginning to think now that this type of geometry that I'm feeling, and I'm not sure of this, there's a possibility it might be purely psychological. I know that there's a certain thing out there as psychological space. That I know. Briefly. Richard is here. I am here. There is something that exists between Richard and I. If I have the feeling that Richard doesn't want me to touch him, I'm not going to cross that space. There's a gap there. We use it in society every day, especially in New York. We walk down the streets of New York. We don't look nobody in the eye. No way. You don't do that. I'm aware of this psychological space that exists. Now, more and more people, a writer, someone I knew quite well, Edouard Glissant, wrote a book called The Relations of Space. He's dealing with this. He's aware of this. Perhaps that somewhere within that gap might be some form of geometry in there lurking around. Might be. If it is, it could be highly relevant in a relational matter for use, practical use in society to help cut through some of the bullshit. I'm always looking for common denominators. I'm desperate. I spent all my life chasing this. You know, I came from a hellhole. No other way to put it. I'm a product of American apartheid. Nasty stuff. We got to come up with some way to close the gap. If I can find a geometry in there that helped me to do that, God bless.
Jack, thanks for being here. There's nothing like hearing it about art from the artists themselves. Could you talk a little bit about the monolith paintings?
There's a whole series of the monolith paintings. They are, a lot of our critics have used the word dedications, but they're more than just mere dedications. The monoliths are a test of my skills. I always say that my history in painting is one of materiality. There's a history of materiality in paint. The monoliths are a test of my skills. What that person stands for, I have to learn to penetrate the symbol through the material. They started with an inspiration at my house in Crete. We have this massive monolith. Every morning out on the back porch at breakfast, I'm staring at it. It comes out of the ground like this huge thing, rock. We call it Alenikos Harakos. It's quite massive. That damn thing penetrated my psyche. It's so painful. so massive and so symbolic, right? So I said, what if? Use that as a form, get a presence out of it, go over to people who have inspired me, people who have gone out of their way to make a change in society, people who have contributed a lot, right? Every time I've met these people, anywhere in the world, there's an energy about them. So if you get that energy and tap into it, you can locate the symbol. We have Barbara Jordan. I never met her, but everything that woman stood for, to hear her talk, the things that she wrote, right? I just finished one in the studio to Du Bois. If it hadn't been for Du Bois, Jack Whitten wouldn't be sitting in this damn chair here today. It was he who insisted that black folks got to learn something more than the manual trades. Now, I went to Tuskegee. I know all about Booker T. Washington. And there's some truth in that, right? In the black community, economics is a thing that we still suffer from. So Booker T's notion was that, look, at least if we could make a buck out of something in trades and so forth, we could make a living. There's a lot of truth of that. But that's not the whole picture. Du Bois comes along and say, hey, great, but what about the liberal arts? What about the humanities? What if these people want to be artists? What if they want to be dancers, musicians? What if they want to be philosophers? Then what? You're going to teach them how to lay some damn brick? So I have one for Du Bois. The list goes on. It continues. Time I get back home and get back into the studio, I have to penetrate my old buddy Barnett Newman. Now, he's going to be a tough nut to crack. But that's the first thing I got to do. The black monoliths, when someone is here, they've done their best, right? They've given us something to inspire us. It's different, something to raise the spirit. We have to honor them. I don't care if nobody else is doing it. You complain in the black community, we don't get no respect. Fuck that. I give the respect. My mama used to say, if those people don't speak to you, speaking of the nasty white folks down there, I want you to speak because that's how I taught you. I like that. I like that. But that's what they're about.
So it's a test of your skill in the sense that you have to make that painting as good as those people were at their,
I have to come
at
up
their
to,
work.
I have to come up to the task.
Yeah,
Right.
up to their level.
Yep. To make it meaningful.
Hi. Thank you very much for your talk. It was super great. I just wanted to bring up a quote that your talk made me think of that I just had written down from Fernando Pessoa about how man is unable to see. And I'll just read the quote, it's very short. It says, "Man is unable to see his own face. This is what is more terrible. Nature gave him the gift of not being able to see it, just as he is unable to stare at his own eyes. Only in the waters of rivers and lakes could he stare at his face, and the position itself he had to take was symbolic. He had to bend over and lower himself in order to commit the indignity of looking at himself. The creator of the mirror has poisoned the human soul." And that's the end of his quote, and that just made me think about what you were talking about, the soul, and how maybe paintings or your paintings are synonymous with that, or made me think of that, like a thing that is unable to stare at its own eyes. So a painting, it can see, but maybe can't see itself, and wanted you to sort of, if you could, expound upon that or react to that, or you can say pass, too.
Well, it's a good metaphor, and I'm aware of it. Ancient people knew this. The water was the medium. My medium is acrylic paint. It's the same thing. I see myself through the paint, but the paint is the medium. I hope that doesn't make something too simple, but that I'm very much aware of. And I do think, though, that I can still use that. It might help me with these dimensional things, right? Because I'm very much aware of now something that I refer to it as the reverse shadow. That's what I call it, right? A lot of philosophers have pointed out the fact that no one can jump over their own shadow. No one can jump over their own shadow. But if you got all these dimensionalities working,
You can try.
it's a funny thing. I shouldn't be too humorous about things, but humor is one of my tools in my toolbox. You know, if you can't laugh at it, hey, you better find another trade.
I wondered, hello? Yeah, I wondered how sound has influenced your work, and if maybe that's not that other dimension.
Well, sound, yes, absolutely. All through, since junior high school, I've played tenor saxophone. I played in the marching bands all through high school, college, Air Force ROTC, Precision Marching Band. Our jazz, very much influenced with that. Ultimately, beyond just the contemporary notions of experience, it becomes something much more a priori, goes beyond the notion of experience. That old ancient thing, I think it was Pythagoras, right? Yes, who constructed the notion of music of the spheres. Later, Plato picked it up. But first it was Pythagoras, who was a geometer. It starts there. Down deep somewhere, deep in the spirit is a sound. The Buddhists call it that which is produced without two things striking. That's what they call it. Down in music, I can feel those vibrations. It's a cosmic vibration out there. When it operates at a specific frequency, it produces a sound. That I know. This is not hocus pocus. This is not fairy tale land. We know in the physical world that water moisture, right conditions, diffuse sunlight produces a spectrum, and we can see red, yellow, blue, green. We know that. There's an exact equivalent of that to sound, where at a definitively frequency, it produces a sound. So in discovering that, another tool in my toolbox. But that's the real connection to jazz. It's those frequencies. I believe in vibrations. I believe that they exist out there, and I believe that the artists are the people who can pick up on those vibrations, and the artists are the people who can structure them into something meaningful. That's why I tell everybody when they ask me about art and the meaning of art, I say all art is structured feelings. That's all it is. You got feelings about something, you found a way to structure it. That's all it is. It's not nothing more complicated than that.
Because a feeling is a kind of vibration
Absolutely.
as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Feeling is a vibration. Everybody, well, hopefully, I don't know if Donald Trump is capable of feeling, but hopefully everybody is capable of feeling. I mean, that's where, hey,
We have the word insensitive, which covers a lot.
covers a lot.
yeah.
Yeah. You give him more credit than I do.
Well, he can, no, I mean, insensitive, you can be very insensitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you can be ultimately extensive to the pinpoint of moron.
It does equate with intelligence, yeah,
Yeah. I think so.
on the same scale,
Yeah. In Greek, we say gurinachi.
which means?
It's a pig. Guruni.
We'll remember that word.
I was hoping to have a few laughs here today.
Hello. Oh, there certainly have been a lot of laughs today, and that's been wonderful. I'm intrigued by something you said earlier about how technology and science have changed the way that we perceive the world in ways that we don't even understand yet.
Yeah.
And you also said that art should be relevant to the time in which it is made.
Yes.
How do you think technology and science is changing the way viewers perceive your work? And are you thinking about this as you make pieces such as Soul Map?
In the construction of the concept, yes, I'm thinking about that. But in the process of making, I use my training of no mind. The conceptual, yes, very important. And I spend a lot of time with the conceptual, the building it up. I take my lead, in truth, from the jazz musicians. They spend all of their time constructing, right? All their chords, all their theories. Very conceptual-minded people, the jazz musicians. But when it comes time to get up on that damn stage, when the gigs start, all that shit goes out the window. They act. They do not separate the thinking from the action, the thinking from the idea. They don't separate it. Don't do that. It's all built into the act. That's what's unique about them. So that's how I handle this thing with perception. Yeah, I'm aware of what technology is doing and so forth. On the other note, I'm also aware that we're all primitives. All of us, white, black, all of us, we're all primitives. And I say that because we're in the primitive stages of technology. You ain't seen nothing yet. We think we're smart. We are in the primitive stages of technology. We don't know to what degree it has altered us. And it's causing a lot of problems in society with people who teach little kids, for example, with parents dealing with teenagers. We haven't caught up with it. We haven't caught up with it. Ultimately, my objective in painting is worldview. I want a worldview that will instruct me on how to conduct myself in the world. That's what I want.
Because we haven't really figured out psychologically what the effect of social media is.
We don't know.
And we're all
People understand
caught
are
up
studying it, but we don't know.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel, you were talking, do you ever feel as though, you've talked a lot about being inspired by music and sound. Do you ever feel like a painting that you've made allows you to hear something different in music that you're already familiar with?
Yeah. I have to be careful with that one, though, because it might force me to pick up my tenor sax again, and I don't want to do that. I don't want to go there. But I do believe, though, because of this shift in perception, there's a lot of sounds out there that we haven't heard yet. I often say that there's a lot of colors out there that we haven't seen yet. And for damn sure, there's a lot of feelings out there that we have not felt yet. I take some comfort in that because it gives me an optimism toward life. And I know when I wake up tomorrow morning, I got something to do.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah, it's a good feeling. Very good feeling. Very good feeling.
Why don't we thank Jack Whitten and Richard Shiff.
Thank you.